Aloha! My name is Jeremy Vaeni, and I am not just a large, sweaty man with an awkwardly stoic resting face. I'm also an experiencer of high strangeness, someone with some sort of odd Kundalini aliveness. I used to write for UFO Magazine. I am the author of several books, including but not limited to Urgency, I Know Why the Aliens Don't Land, and Aliens, the First and Final Disclosure. Oh, and also, I'm to tell you this and I'm to tell you is fiction. Yeah, that one's good too. I currently am the permanent guest host of Dreamland, the last Friday of every month, which is normally with Whitley Strieber. I am also the host of a podcast called Our Undoing Radio, and formerly the co-host of Paratopia with the late, great Jeff Ritzman, which is hands down still the greatest paranormal podcast ever. Why am I listing you this resume? Well, because I'm doing a reaction video to Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp on Joe Rogan's show talking about David Grusch. And so I'm going to say things that sound like a debunker, but are really just basic discernment to my mind. So I'm not a psychologist. All of these opinions are just my own opinion. And I guess I have to say those things or people get upset somehow. Like I'm doing an opinion show, but I still have to say it's in my opinion, or else all is lost. Like, how dare I have an authoritative voice on anything? I don't know. If this goes well, maybe I'll get myself a fancy introduction and set it up to the good camera instead of just sweating into the, FaceTime cam. But if it doesn't go well, then I won't. This is just a one-off, and you'll just have to deal with the fact that every time I move or laugh, the camera shakes. Okay, so let's get into David Grusch here, and let's get an honest reaction from an experiencer / UFO nut.
But what we did was we put on congressional record statements, and people should read them if they haven't. They're on congressional record. I did an assessment of kind of the estimate of the situation on UFOs, but he named names and programs. But what you're seeing there is, and I kind of had to fight for this, is getting his lawyer behind him should be like an obvious fucking thing when a guy's going up to testify under oath in front of Congress. If you believe him, he's speaking under whistleblower protection. Dude, it was hard to get his lawyer behind him. I had literally had to put the lawyer behind him. So we got the lawyer behind him so he could lean in and be like, careful, Dave, careful, which he did like a bunch of times. Mm-hmm. And then there's George looking all scrunched, and everybody's like, why Jeremy over there with no one next to him? I think people are a little afraid of me because, a little bit of a maniac sometimes.
Okay, so this will be the weakest thing that I say, perhaps for you. But one way in which I think Jeremy Corbell is manipulative right off the bat is that he really, really wants to have main character syndrome and be the center of this and all that he does, but he's smart enough to know that he can't. Nobody is afraid of him being a wild maniac, and that's why he's sitting alone. That's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense to me that he had to direct David Grusch's lawyer to sit behind him. If Grusch's lawyer didn't want to sit behind him, maybe it's because there's no reason to. Because he's not going to say anything that he can't say because he's already said it all and was cleared to say everything that he said because it's nonsense. And this is the, I think, little known fact, although probably a lot of you know this already. Anyone who's watching this probably knows this, and hence, if you're a believer in this, you've debated it away somehow in your head. But the fact is the Department of Defense will allow former employees, or maybe just employees, to write books about their time there if nothing they say is, top secret or secret, if they're not giving away a secret. So in other words, it's their right to lie. They can lie about it if they want. So the Department of Defense can sign off on all this alien stuff that Grusch has said because they know it's not true.
Whatever. We're there. Dave starts talking. They ask him questions. These weren't pre-scripted or anything. We're talking about what could be asked for sure, but they weren't pre-scripted. What Dave Grusch said, and correct me or add to if I get this wrong, Dave Grusch said, I did an investigation. It was my job. I was hired by, and this is a guy from the National Reconnaissance Office, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Like this guy is he's been in the intelligence community a long time. And he sits there under oath and he says, I did an investigation. I interviewed, it was my job to look at over 2,000 special access programs, like black programs. And it was my job to find out if any of them had to do with UAP and if there's any money being hidden, like misappropriated, theft. And he's like, after interviewing 40 witnesses, I found a ton of shit.
So this is kind of misleading because it would lead you to believe that, like, the Department of Defense hired David Grusch to look into whether the Department of Defense had projects involving aliens, involving UAP. I mean, none of that makes sense. It makes sense if his boss asked him to do this, his boss who is a UFO believer and just kind of wants to know. Like, that part might make sense, and I think we're going to hear that without it actually them saying it.
That supports this. And in fact, he said, I've found people who worked on the craft firsthand. And they had to come in, or they willingly came in. He called them hostile and non-hostile witnesses. And he's like, so I did that whole thing. The second I did that, which was my job, I was given the job, reprisals started happening to me. So he smartly did a whistleblower complaint through the Presidential Protection Act 19 or something. He got the head of the ICIG, the former head of the ICIG, who's a lawyer, and he says, fuck, dude, here's what I know. Here's what people don't know.
Wait, here's what people don't know. What were the reprisals, and how do we know that they were linked to this?
The ICIG, so the intelligence community, did their own investigation into David Grusch's witnesses and what he found. They interviewed like 40 plus under oath and immediately said, David Grusch's claim is both credible and urgent. So it's not like just one guy telling you. Our intelligence community did a deep dive investigation.
Credible and urgent didn't have to do with any of his UFO claims or people working on alien body claims. The credible and urgent, I believe, had to do with his complaint, right? Like, you see the way Jeremy Corbell in his language is sort of conflating the two things so that you think that there was an investigation into his claims and that they were credible and urgent. The claims of there being, down saucers and bodies and stuff. That's not what that urgent and credible is in reference to. It's in reference to his complaint of, I guess, reprisals?
Investigation into what David Grusch told them under oath in the right secure settings, and they're like credible, urgent. So David Grusch can tell you the basic things that happened, but you know how he kept saying in the appropriate environment, if you've got clearance, we can do that. I'm willing to give you a list of hostile and non-hostile people that worked on the craft. Biologicals, he even said. He's like, I'll give that to you today.
Are any of those people Bob Lazar? Ting.
We just got to get a skiff, and we got to make sure that you have access, you have clearance. And he was denied a skiff that day.
Okay, what about any other day? See, I keep hearing this. He was denied a skiff. What about every other day since the hearings? What about now? What about right now? Can we get him into a skiff?
He's a credible guy. He's the real deal. I mean, he had a career in the Air Force, served in Afghanistan, a distinguished career. Then he goes into the intelligence community, working for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. He was assigned by his boss to be the liaison to the UAP task force. That's what Congress had set it up to investigate the whole UFO matter before the current program existed. And the guy who was in charge of the task force, Jay Stratton, gave him a job. Go find the special access programs.
Oh, Jay Stratton gave him the job. The job. Can we talk to Jay Stratton about what it means to have a job? Is it like the job is to be the liaison, but Jay Stratton is like, but you know what? I really want to know about this UAP stuff in terms of what we've got and what we're dealing with. So go figure that out, huh? Let's get to that, huh? Does Jay Stratton's boss at this point know that that's what he's up to? That's a question.
That are hiding UFO stuff. either siphoning millions of dollars, or they've got technology, crash retrievals, reverse engineering, all the stuff that we've always heard rumored, and he did. He found it. Most of the juiciest stuff that he found, he can't say in an unclassified setting. It has to be because they will get him. They will bust his ass if they can. They've already tried.
Like 4 times, and that's something offline we'll talk about. There have been attempts to get him silenced, unmuzzled, by the way, to not do podcasts or shows and stuff, right? To get him muzzled by people that are trying to say he's talking outside of his Dopser, which is like what he's allowed to talk about. Mm-hmm. So they're looking for one word that he says that's outside of that. Like I get asked by
So here's where Joe Rogan, as a semi-intelligent interviewer, jumps in and says, well, wait a minute, George Knapp, you brought Bob Lazar to the public, and Jeremy Corbell, you made a name for yourself by resurrecting Bob Lazar many years later. So why is it that Bob Lazar could openly talk about Area 51 and aliens and sports model UFOs and all this stuff, and Grusch has to go through the ringer? And by the way, what was the Dopser? What was the thing that they didn't want him to talk about that would be outside the bounds of the stuff he was able to talk about, when apparently what he was able to talk about was like, I don't know, snagging a UFO for Mussolini, right? Like all of the stuff that you know is the stuff that the Dopser says he's allowed to say. And the reason he's allowed to say it is because it's not true. Just like what Bob Lazar was saying isn't true. In fact, why isn't Bob Lazar at these hearings? Oh, right. Because it's nonsense. And the same nonsense is being brought to you by the exact same people? Huh. That's interesting.
People in the government. Has he ever told you the number of crashes? Has he ever told you locations? Like, I'm going to fucking answer you. First of all. Second of all, no, he hasn't. Because that would be illegal if it were to be true.
So he is authorized to talk about a very limited number of things. Is that correct?
And they're not vouching for their authenticity. Dopser process, which is, I don't know what it stands for, but it's like pre-pub process. He very smartly, because his lawyer is really smart, former ICIG, he's like, write it in what you want to talk about and see what they come back about what you can't talk about. So they're not saying what he's saying is true. They're just saying you can talk within these parameters. I would like to see if...
Right. You can talk about that there are aliens and that there are UFOs and that we're working on them. You can talk about all this stuff, Dave. Go right ahead. Because it's not true. By the way, why does Jeremy Corbell seem like a Jack Black character more and more when I watch him speak? I don't know.
If what he's saying is true. So we just need that option.
So who gives him the authority to talk about these things?
No one gives him the authority. He's taking that all on himself. He's a true whistleblower,
No,
whether you believe his claims or not. What he's doing is legal, but it is, I mean, it's a career killer, right?
His career was already killed. He was a real estate agent, right? Like we're going to get into in a minute that he was like alcoholic and suicidal and PTSD and all this. I don't know the man, but I would assume that some of this may have to do with some career moves that he has made in his later life here. Just saying. My opinion.
Dopser says they go through it and they make sure that things that are like highly sensitive are classified, right? Like you can't say this word or this program or this name. So they kind of do it as a pre-publication thing. That's the process.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I wrote a book with Colin Kelleher and Jim Katsky about the DIA's UFO program. It took Dopser 14 months to approve our manuscript. So.
Yeah, it took them 14 months to go, do we want to read this thing? Yeah, fine. Okay, approve it. Nothing in here is true.
They take their time.
They take their time. But also when you get pushback where people are trying to entrap him or get people to say that he said something out of school, the Dopser people are like, no, he's fine. Like, he's talked within those parameters. He just has to be careful to not accidentally say something that is outside of those parameters.
What would be outside the parameters? He said the thing about Mussolini, right? He said the thing about the football field size UFO in a hangar somewhere that they built around it. He said the thing about the alien bodies. What's the parameters? What's the thing he can't whistleblow about? Why isn't he hiding out in Russia as a legit whistleblower? Why is he still here? we fall for this every time, folks. It's like every few years, it's the same thing in a different body.
And right now is a very sensitive time for that, immediately.
It's interesting. We met him in Huntsville, Alabama, at a conference, the SCU conference. It's a UFO event. We went down there to interview somebody else,
Of course,
and to get him on camera. And we had been told there's a guy might introduce himself. And Jeremy was shooting video of me sitting at a bar
of course.
at the moment that this guy walked up and introduced himself.
So someone tells you, hey, this guy's coming, this deep state guy, I don't know what we would call him, military guy, intelligence officer, he might want to meet you. No, he's going there to meet you. Like, this is the setup, right? I'm going to the UFO conference to entice these guys into this story.
We had that moment on camera, and then we got to know him a little bit. A couple months later, he comes out to Las Vegas. There was a Star Trek convention. We were going to speak at it. And he comes out because he likes Star Trek, like everybody likes Star Trek, comes out and spends 2 days with us. The next day, he flies back Sunday night. Monday morning, he reports to work. Armed security guards escort him out. He was suspended. His clearance was suspended. We were worried, oh, Christ, was he seen in our company and that's what happened? But that was the beginning of his first real big trial by fire. They accused him of a bunch of stuff and said that they were going to fire him and permanently suspend his clearance.
So what was the bunch of stuff? That's the important point. They want to just flippantly say that this isn't a coincidence. He came and met with us and then he was fired for a bunch of stuff. We need to know what the bunch of stuff was, don't we? We can't just... They want us to have this sort of, and I'm not saying George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell are doing this part manipulatively on purpose. I just think that when we speak, we're lazy by law. And so the laziest way that we can communicate is what we're going to do. And in ufology, you only have to say a couple of things for the listener to fill in the blanks on their own. So what they want you to fill in the blanks with is that this guy is the real deal. He came to see us and he was fired because of it, or he was harassed and fired because of it. And as proof, he came to see us. They charged him with a bunch of stuff and escorted him out, right? But they don't tell you what that stuff is because you're not likely to care. You're not likely as a listener to ask, like, hey, what was that stuff? And was it a coincidence? Because they want you to believe it's not, and you want you to believe it's not, because you believe that all of this is real. So, saying it out loud is really superfluous at that point. It's just, if you have a will to believe, you believe it anyway. So they don't need to fill in the blanks with details, prove anything, put out footnotes.
And was he already discussing UFOs at that time?
Not with us, but he had already been investigating it on behalf of the UAP task force, and he had shared information through the whistleblower process with the Inspector General. Yeah,
let me just break it down real simple. So here he is. He gets this job. He's looking at all these special access programs. He's a fucking brilliant guy. He's a physicist, by the way. He's a brilliant guy in general. So he discovers all this shit. He starts getting reprisals, and then the moment George is talking about, I kind of had heard about him. All of a sudden, he comes up to him at this bar where we were at. That's the first time that he talked to anybody outside of government. Now
Then how had you sort of heard about this guy? I sort of heard about this guy, but this was the first time I spoke. I mean, he's got to be speaking to people, unless you're saying that, like, Lou Elizondo counts as not speaking to someone outside of government, even though he's another UFO guy now, right? Like, no, none of this stuff really makes sense the way that they want it to make sense. In other words, this isn't some innocent guy just stumbling upon these two UFO investigators, and no one's ever heard of him before, and the reprisal that he received is because of this. Top to bottom, that doesn't sound true.
He didn't share anything he shouldn't, but he was kind of coming to George and then to me to say, I'm doing this whistleblower thing. I am concerned for my safety and just in general for my career. He wanted a journalist or journalists to know, not to report on it. So imagine that. We don't even break the story that we had before anybody, right? So what I did, because I'm his harpoon, I did a deep dive into this guy for months and months and months. He actually came to my home, met my family, like, and I got to know
Deep dive, including spaghetti night with the family.
him, and we vetted and vetted. Okay, this guy is who he says he is. He's 100% who he says he is. So we kind of got that layer of trust. This is not some sham or something like that. But then what happens is what George was talking about, the second trip. So I'm already talking at this Star Trek thing because my friend growing up from my jiu-jitsu class was Rod Roddenberry. So he's like the son of Gene Roddenberry. So he's just like, dude, Jeremy, come talk to a bunch of Trekkies about real UFOs. And I'm like, cool, I'll do it. It's in George's hometown. So that was a great opportunity for Dave to come and meet with us again and just talk to us, right? Yeah. And then that Monday when he gets back, he's walked out of the Geospatial Intelligence Agency or NRO, depending on which one you want to identify him with. He's out, man. And they did some bullshit on him, like time card. Like out of 12,000 billable hours, maybe there's like 30 hours somewhere where you didn't do it right. They were doing anything they could.
So, in Jeremy Corbell's mind, which he assumes is your mind, which is, again, why they're not going to do any due diligence on this, his deep dive didn't include what he was up to for those 30 hours. It's just like, he billed for 30 hours. And, you know, it turns out that he was doing what during those 30 hours? Taking a vacation, going to a Star Trek convention. Like, what was he doing for those 30 hours? That's a pretty important piece of it, unless you just want us to believe that, like, it's a BS charge to get him with 30 hours. Seems like a lot to me. For like, if I was not working on the job for 30 hours and I billed it, I'm pretty sure somebody would notice.
To fuck with this guy. So that was our first like heads up. Oh, dude, how this guy gets treated is going to dictate everybody else that has come to us in private saying, I think this is illegal, what I'm doing.
Right.
Among the complaints they issued to try to take away his security clearance was that he had mental health issues.
Yeah.
So he was suspended for a couple of months. They did a background investigation of his allegations, the allegations that have been made against him, and they cleared him, reinstated his security clearance. He stayed on the job for a couple more months and then retired because he sees the handwriting on the wall, and he left.
Okay, I'm not sure. I think he's talking about the 2014 incident. There are two incidents where I believe his wife calls the police and says, like, David's an alcoholic, he has PTSD. I don't know if she says the PTSD thing. She may have, but she definitely said he's an alcoholic and he's like having an episode and he's threatening to kill himself. And like whoever did the investigation notes that he is has a tendency toward violence and is well armed. So if that's what you're talking about now, in the Intercept article that broke this story, Ken Klippenstein, I believe, is or Klippenstein is the author. Talks to anonymous, I don't know, colleagues, I guess, of David Grusch, who say they found it weird that after the 2014 incident, which I think is what they're talking about here, but maybe they're talking about 2018. But after the 2014 incident, this colleague says anonymously, they find it odd that he did in fact keep his security clearance, but they chalk it up to like sort of the old boys club. Like once you're in, you're in. And that actually makes sense to me. It just does. I mean, we've already seen the other, the kid, basically, the young man who went on a, a Discord server or something, and exposed top secret government documents because he thought it would make him look cool, right? Like, so, the idea that the best and brightest are running a tight ship in the Department of Defense, not so much.
And that's when he started plotting the next chapter. And now we're seeing the backlash process firing up once again. After he testifies in front of Congress in that hearing and offers to tell them more in a classified setting and spill all the beans, they got to find a media guy to go after him. This article in The Intercept.
The Intercept did a smash piece. By the way, we already knew all about Dave Grusch's PTSD. Mm-hmm. And at the time, his best friend, one of his dear friends, just got off the phone with him, blew his own brains out, right? So he was like drinking. He was in a bad place. The first day one, I talked to him. I said, what dirt are they going to pull up on you? If what you're telling me is true, they're going to get some dirt. And he goes, look, man, I had PTSD. I dealt with it. I survived it. Nothing horrible happened. But, he told us day one, man, that intercept thing was some bullshit. They come in and they try to discredit what he said because of his PTSD shit. And the thing is, that happened to Lazar. Like, if you believe or don't believe, don't care. That did happen to Lazar, too, where people try to discredit his character to try to minimize what he's telling you.
Of course, with Bob Lazar, that's because he was setting up video cameras in brothels illegally or something. Like, didn't he go to jail for this? But okay, let's get back to Grusch here. Notice what he's not saying. Alcoholism. He's saying had some drinking problems related to PTSD during this incident. He's making it sound as though like it's the one incident. There are at least two. There are two recorded incidents that we know about. And David Grusch has said that his PTSD is responsible for both incidents, or at least that's the way he makes it sound in any of the things that I've read. And furthermore says he's over it. His PTSD doesn't have a hold on him anymore. Well, if we're to believe that something happened in 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, that's pretty good therapy to not be under the spell of PTSD anymore. Like within 5 years, you got rid of PTSD? I don't believe that. Also, you're an alcoholic, right? Like, somebody help me out here. The man is an alcoholic. Did he get over that too? Was it like within 5 years he no longer has alcoholism or PTSD? It's just, this is where it is important to know the mental health background. He was, he was threatening to kill himself, right? He was put in a mental hospital or some sort of adult mental care unit for a bit. The fact that he was then, I guess, brought back to, with the security clearances and all that, could mean what he says, which is that he's all fine and they believed he was fine, or it could just be like the anonymous person said, once you're in, you're in. Flip a coin. But we're talking about the biggest secrets on earth, so make sure that's an honest coin, not like a two-headed coin.
So we saw that with Dave, and that was only the visible stuff. I'm telling you, things behind the scenes that have been done to Dave and his family, it's disgusting. Like, not even just like pull your clearance kind of shit. Like, there are people that don't want him, that he's an embarrassment, to the Department of Defense. If what he's saying, he's coming out of school and he's saying, I saw some BS.
Why would he be an embarrassment if they cleared him to say it?
Like, they don't want that.
So we are in a pushback phase. They not only the intelligence community and military folks tipped off a reporter and said, go look for this. And they found some police records of where he was drinking too much and was suicidal. And that was adjudicated. It was looked at. The Department of Defense, his employers looked into it. He'd gone through treatment. He got past it. He was a better person, a stronger person for it. But they leaked that information to besmirch his character. And now we see additional pushback in Congress. So this committee that held this hearing into UAP matters was a subcommittee on national security of the Oversight Committee, the larger committee. Since that hearing happened, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee got together with the chairman of the Oversight Committee and decided no more UFO hearings in the House. Enough of that bullshit. We're not doing that anymore because, in their words, it could be an embarrassment to the Department of Defense. You're damn right it would be an embarrassment for what's going to come out.
I mean, it was a big success, to have this.
Again, the assumption that it would be a big embarrassment because there would be some revelations above and beyond what they allowed him to already say, which is everything.
Publicly done. It's the first time in history that we have direct witnesses, like 2 pilots and then a whistleblower. It was the first time in history. We fought for every millimeter of that territory to get that to happen. It was not received well by the intelligence community. They did not like that happened. And that's pretty telling to me.
I didn't like that happened, and I'm not in the intelligence community. In fact, I'm an experiencer. You would think that I would love that this happened, but I find it to be highly suspicious. So there you go, folks. That actually, when I first heard David Grusch, I thought, and I knew that he was like a realtor, I thought like, oh, here's a guy who went from the life of an intelligence officer and war and all of that, like the highs and lows and the quote unquote excitement of that lifestyle, into being a realtor, and probably couldn't take it and is like, I've got to somehow get back on that roller coaster, man, and make money. I know, the UFO thing. So in my head, I'm thinking like, okay, that's what he's doing. And then there are people like Lou Elizondo and Grush's boss, who really do believe that there's something being hidden. So they're willing to throw everything at the wall, spaghetti at the wall, to see what sticks, to force the government's hand into admitting anything beyond what they've already admitted, because these guys know in their heart of hearts that it's true. We've got bodies, we've got technology, blah. We just got to get them to say it somehow. Doesn't matter how. And then along comes David Grusch, this miracle child. So I thought that maybe he was just Grusch was just sort of a dupe that these people were coming to, and either, telling him these stories that they believe to be true because they're compartmentalized and maybe believe they're working on alien stuff, or more likely that there's a story that the government, not the government, but these military factions want out there, that essentially this is a perpetual money-making scheme to have a forever enemy that isn't just an ism like terrorism, which is a good forever enemy, but it's not a forever enemy. But a forever enemy is an invisible one that isn't human and is somewhere around. That we can get money to study perpetually. And NASA, of course, would want to be in on that, because ever since the Challenger shuttle crash of the 80s, they had been sort of fending for their lives, looking for funding, right? So why wouldn't they want to jump on board and be like, okay, everyone's interested in UFOs. We live in a society now where facts don't matter, and like QAnon is just as real as anything to people. All right, great. We'll cave. We'll give in to some of our intellectual street cred. We'll give it away, and we'll do these investigations if it means you give us money to do it. So that's kind of what I thought was going on, somewhere in there. But now I'm actually back to my original thing of like, I think that Grusch had problems, was booted, was essentially demoted into this crap office, looking at UAPs, whatnot. Maybe he couldn't even handle that. I don't know what the exact timeline is of him being canned and all of that. But I mean, essentially, if he's an alcoholic and has such a, because it's not just a job change, like going from this life to a real estate agent. It's a massive life change. Like the overhaul of everything that you think you are and know has now been rebuked. I don't know, demoted, something. It's been completely changed. One lifestyle to another. And it's unwanted, I'm assuming. And that probably drove him deeper. And I don't know what other personal demons he has or issues. I don't know anything about the guy. This is just me imagining what's going on here. So then he's like, okay, I've got to get going on this disclosure thing. That's going to be my out. Because you can say like he's not making any money off this, or what he put out, that long interview, that's all he's done. But this is the way things go, right? Like this is, I mean, it's the same. It's the same handlers too, as a Bob Lazar. Like you've got the guy who makes the claims, then you've got the guys who vouch for him, and the PR people who come out of the woodwork, Ross Coulthart and the such, and pretend to be like real reporters doing real reporting. Ross Coulthart and George Knapp may be real reporters in other ways, but that credibility does not transfer onto this PR type other life that they live. But they want it to, and if you're in ufology, you won't pay any attention to the discrepancy. You'll just be like, yeah, they're reporters reporting. They're not doing propaganda for the thing that I love and want to hear. So it's up to us to have this discernment, folks. If you're in ufology, you have to have some level of discernment, or what are you doing here? And this is not adding up. I feel like they told on themselves with this, especially the fact that, again, Bob Lazar is able to say all of this stuff publicly. And the only go to answer for that is like, well, he came out and said it. So what were they going to do? Kill him and prove his point that he knew all this stuff? It's like, that's not how this works. I mean, they could have killed him later in life so that he stops talking about it and made it look like a disease or an accident or something. Like, nothing ever happened to Bob Lazar, because nothing ever happened to Bob Lazar. And so it is with David Grusch. Nothing bad is going to happen to David Grusch because he's, not telling the truth. And whether whether I'm wrong and him not telling the truth is a product of people coming to him and telling this stuff, and he believes that it's true, and they're the ones that are wrong or lying, and he's just passing on untruths by accident, or that he's in on it or making it up himself or whatever, I tend to think that whatever the case is, none of it's true. And he stands to make a fortune at some point with like either movie deals, TV deals, documentary deals, book deals, being a consultant on films and television, all that stuff, all that money-making stuff. And he can, right now, if he wants, he can go to any convention. He can have somebody sit in the audience who he pretends is with him to tell him what not to say, who he looks to. Like Dan Burrish, I think, used to do that. Probably nobody remembers that name because he was actually called out and caught as a fraud. But in his heyday, he was another Bob Lazar who claimed to have worked at, I think, even Area 51 or S4, one of those places, and all of this. And when he would go to conventions, he had like a plant who was with him who he would look to pretend like they were with the Department of Defense, and they were like his handler that he would have to sort of look to say, can I talk about this? And they'd say, no, you can't talk about that. I mean, it's the sort of con games that go into the cottage industry of ufology are astounding. And I know there are so many of you out there who say like, why can't we all just be in this together for the fight for truth? And it's because so many people are not. So many people are here to swindle you. I don't know that David Grusch is here to swindle you. I just know that he doesn't pass my sniff test, and none of this smacks of the truth.